acquire land for agriculture. We're going to be talking about some of the pros and cons of that, but we're really going to delve into what it means to be ready to access land and to be able to delve into those conversations. And a lot of that is going to be financial. And it's because what we've learned is that financial readiness is really key to being able to find land to farm, whether that is leasing or buying land. The curriculum is also grounded in what we call a land ethic that sees the land as part of the community and is really looking at stewardship of land, and that is really important. And looking at the importance of soil and thinking of ourselves as stewards of the land over time, regardless of what kind of lands that we have. And so that's been a really important ethic of the American Farmland Trust, who led this project, and also the different educators that were working together to develop the curriculum. And many of those educators are also farmers. This course, as I said, is really skill-based, and that means that people learn by doing. And that's not just listening to me talk and share slides or reading resources, but we do have activities that we're going to be asking you to do in worksheets, self-assessments that we're going to ask you to do, and then also joining in conversations about sharing what you learn. So it's based on the science of how we learn best as adults and humans. And so I'm going to be asking you to do things that hopefully you'll find really fun, but they all have purpose. And so that's why I'm asking you to have your cameras on when we have discussions so that we can connect. It's a bit harder in a virtual format. I'm glad that we have Zoom and that we can connect through Zoom. But the discussions that we have over the 4 sessions that we have together in the Q&A sections are a really important part of developing the knowledge and skills to move forward to acquire land. We have 4 different topics that we're going to cover in this short course. And so this week we're talking about an introduction to the different land tenure options, some of the things to think about. Next week, we're going to be talking about assessing your financial position, how you develop some of the financial statements that you're going to be asked for if you are trying to buy land, or even probably if you're going to lease land. So we're going to look at those financial statements, and then you'll have an opportunity between weeks 2 and 3 to do some work on starting to draft those statements. In week 3, we're going to talk about leasing and buying land, delving a little bit deeper into each of those things. And we are going to have a guest in week 3 who is a loan officer with Northwest Farm Credit Services, and she'll be talking to you about what lenders are looking for when you come to them in terms of wanting to finance agricultural land. And then in week 4, we're going to be talking about some of the places that you can find land, and then assessing land for the purpose that you are looking for land, or the purposes you're looking for land. And I'm really excited that in week 2, we're going to have a farmer, Emily Black, who's from Ethel, Idaho, that's going to come on and talk about her land access journey and what they're doing with their property. And in week 4, Diane Green, who's a farmer up in Sandpoint, who also does a lot of consulting with people that are buying land or have bought land and what they can do in terms of growing on it, is going to be talking about how to assess farmland and what farmland can be used for. So when you go out in the field, you have some better tools for that. In the classroom, which we're going to delve into a little bit more towards the end of our time together today, there are a lot of resources. And I want to thank Holly. She pointed out that a couple of the links that broke to a couple of the resources, and websites are changing all the time. So if you do find anything that is broken, please let myself or Mackenzie know, and we will definitely get that fixed. We'll search it out and find the resource again and relink it. So this course was designed that it could be an 8-week course with about 3 hours each session. So we're really condensing it into some core topics for finding farmland. And we're also then providing you with all of the additional resources that are available through this overall package of curriculum. And you'll have access to all of that information for several months. So you're going to have those resources if you move through this and you decide that leasing land is really where you want to go, there's a whole section of resources, the same for purchasing land. So while we'll be delving into things because we have a limited amount of time together at a higher level, you can really go deeper with the resources that are available to you. So with that, I'm going to ask everybody to introduce yourself, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so everybody gets bigger in the screen when we do that. So I'm going to ask you to share your name, where you live, and where you want to live. This might be different. And then briefly describe how you envision your life when you achieve your farming or ranching dream. Okay, great. So let's see. I'm just going to go around as I see people on my screen and ask people to share. And again, if you have an opportunity to turn on your camera while you're speaking, that would be really great for us to get to know you. So I'm going to start with Linda and Randy. Can you introduce yourself? Where you live, where you want to live, and what is it going to look like when you achieve your farming dream? And you're muted right now if you need help unmuting. Okay, while Linda and Randy maybe are able to work with their audio, and maybe Mackenzie, you can see if you could reach them through the chat. I'll go ahead and go to David.
My name's David. I live in Moscow, Idaho, and I work on a farm just south of Moscow, in between Moscow and Genesee. And I'm in a position where I may be the next person to take over the farm, and so I'm investigating what it's going to look like. My family and I have been looking for 5 years, hoping the perfect little farmstead would pop up that we could afford, and it hasn't happened. So we're trying to feel like we need to be a little bit more aggressive. And so I'd like to be doing something similar, but on a place I don't have to commute to. So I'd be right where I lived. So somewhere in the region, because the farm that I work for, it's kind of tied, the market's tied to this region a little bit. So.
Great. Thanks. It's good to see you.
Thanks.
Holly.
Sorry, my name is Holly James. I live in Teton County, Idaho, which is over by Wyoming. And I would like to live somewhere fairly close due to water access. We have a small property now. We moved here from the city. And so I've spent the last 7 years trying to learn self-sustainable farming for my family. And that's what I want to achieve, is to teach my family, my kids mainly, where food comes from and how to appreciate where it comes from, as well as feeding them healthy food. And if that expands, that would be great.
Thanks, Holly. Arden.
All right, just had to unmute myself there. Can you hear me? It's all good? Okay,
Yep.
sweet.
Okay.
I've done too many Zooms, so. Anyway, my name is Arden, and I live in Jackson, Wyoming, but I spent a lot of time in Victor, Idaho. I was working on a farm all season, Teton full circle. And we're just we just play the kind of like more of a homestead type property, to where we're in Jackson, but we just want a little more room, and then eventually kind of grow it into a farm. But then part of it too is just bringing the education side of it. I do a lot of filmmaking with different farmers and doing like recipes with local foods. So just try to bring that into the farm we want to try to create. But I guess start simple, try to find land if it's even possible in our area, and then kind of slowly roll it out and then go from there, I guess.
Thanks. Janelle.
Hi there. I was born and raised in Spokane, and I'm Janelle King, by the way. I was born and raised in Spokane, and I am presently living and farming and homesteading outside of Asheville, North Carolina. But on my way back to Washington State or North Idaho in the not too distant future. So I have been stewarding a piece of 64 acres in North Carolina since 2017, which is up for sale, and I don't want to buy it because it's 1,000-foot elevation difference between the top of the land and the bottom of the land, and it's just more than I want to manage. So I want to scale it way down, and I'm driving the train and own it myself as well, something that's within my means to own, which this parcel is not. And I'm driving the train towards cut flowers and medicinal herbs and raising my family.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. It's kind of late where you are.
We're gonna run up on bedtime for my kids, but it's okay. That's why I'll mute lots.
Okay, great, thanks. Leah.
Hey, sorry, we're in a car headed out of state for my cousin's funeral tomorrow, so hopefully you can hear us okay. But right now we are in eastern Idaho in the Rexburg area, so just across the hill from Teton County. And we've been farming for the past 5 years. We run about 420 acres now, doing forage crops. We do hay and alfalfa hay, grass hay, and we do a lot of custom straw baling and hay baling and work that way. Let's see, what was the other questions? We'd like to stay in the area long term. And then the end game, I guess, so to speak, eventually we'd like to have a cow-calf operation that then flows into a backgrounding feedlot where you feed the calves from weaning until they're ready for a finishing feedlot, and then also have a finishing feedlot segment. It just kind of keeps going, but the backgrounding feedlot is the first step that way, and then just increase the customer doing the hay production along the way and pick up more acres that way. Anything else? I've totally butchered that.
No, that's pretty good. Just to kind of go back and maybe clarify a little, our current operation, the 420 acres is my grandfather's operation that we've been running, but he's 92, and that's gonna, here in the next little while, change hands over to my aunts and uncles, so his kids, my mother included in one of those. And so things are kind of up in the air of what's going to happen there long term. And so we're just to the point where we're ready to find our own place that's our own, where we can start building some equity and some ground and make more of the managerial decisions of what we do with it and how it's done.
We'll just be able to make improvements and have that help us and not potentially hurt us if the option of purchase comes in down the road. So that's why we're really interested in this course, is looking at some of those options there for purchasing and improving that situation for us.
All right, thank you. It's really awesome that we have a number of people as part of the class that do have farming experience, because that's going to be really helpful to you as you're looking for land. We'll talk a little bit more about that today, and then when we're talking with Jessica Harper from Northwest Farm Credit. Carly. And you're muted. Okay, we'll come back and see. Last time we had this course, we had a couple of people that were only able to talk to us through the chat. So if that's the case and you know that your mic doesn't work, you can go ahead and let us know in the chat. But or if you're just trying to figure out how to make it work, Mackenzie's standing by to help with that. We're thinking that we should be able to hear Greg, because I can see his his screen flashing.
I'm sorry, sound cut out. Did you say Greg?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's me. All right, everybody's waiting on me. So I'm Greg Schroeder, and I have absolutely no farming experience. But my wife and I, and we're older, so we're actually looking forward to the next season where most people are wanting to retire and maybe kick back and travel. What we're looking forward to do is growing food. It's just something about it. We love to cook, we love to eat, and we really enjoy gardening. And we have this strong passion for the impact that healthy food, what it does for people. And so we just want to share that and share that passion. So we're looking for land now and probably not making a full transition for 2, 3, 4 years based on, kids completely out of the nest. And then that's something we want to pursue. So I have been working on a business plan, been reading books, and the course, I saw the course the other day. Looks like a great fit and the timing is right. So, but focusing more on market garden, vegetables, got a whole list of vegetables and just smaller scale, just a few acres, and then fruit trees as well. In the Seattle area and looking to get out of Washington and finally, went through all of our options and landed on Idaho. So looking at that.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
And Zach.
Hi, my name is Zach, and I live in Moscow, Idaho, and I originally from the Burma, not from the China, and I ran the restaurant and catering for WSU Sushi, and I have I do a little bit backyard farming every summer, and especially I order from this the seed tropical plant from my old country, and which is very expensive to order here. So I since the last year I was thinking to grow a little bigger than my backyard, and then I found a class, and I have a few experience about rice planting back in from the back my old country, and I was I have a I also interested to do farm to table, and I ran the restaurant. So yeah, here you go. I found a class. So nice to meeting you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. Thank you. So let's see. Linda and Randy, do you want to give another try for introduction? Mackenzie, were you able to link with them or with Carly? Okay, well, if it works out that we can help you with your audio, just let us know. So thank you everyone for introducing each other. I really hope that we can have this class be as interactive as possible when we are online. So if at any time you have a question or a comment, I have several times where we're going to stop, tonight to be able to talk, but go ahead and jump in. So don't feel shy. It's pretty relaxed. We're a small group. We do have 2 additional participants. One that emailed me and said that she couldn't be on tonight, but would be looking at the recording, and another that I haven't heard yet from about getting into the classroom. So I'll probably hear from him in the next day or so, but we are recording this so you can go back and or if you do miss a session, you'll have an opportunity to go back and look at the recording. So we have a couple comments in the chat. You're welcome to use the chat at any time to talk with each other or to share information. Tyler had put in Tyler and Leah, and I'm not sure which person actually worked with Jessica Harper, was interviewed by her with Northwest Farm Credit Services. And so that's really fun, those connections that we have. And then Janelle says that she forgot to mention that she's been in the industry since 2008 after obtaining an ag degree. And so the majority of her experience has been in greenhouse and nursery. So that's really great. So welcome everyone. it's really interesting because when we did this class in the spring, everybody else had totally different experiences, and it's really fun to be working with a new cohort and to kind of go through this conversation about your dreams and your farmland. And, you know, a couple of you mentioned that you've been looking for farmland for a while, and farmland, you know, finding farmland is a process that takes time, perhaps years. It's really interesting for a number of the growers that I've worked with. It has taken from 5 to 10 years to find the right piece of land. That doesn't mean that they weren't farming in between, but if they were purchasing land, it was a very long journey. And there are some ways that you can better prepare for that journey. And then there's been other people who have thought that buying land was for them with a certain amount, but then ended up moving into a lease agreement or having a little bit of a combo where they had a smaller property that they could afford because that's what they realized worked for them. And then they leased additional land to make that operation work. So part of the process of thinking about farmland is also thinking about how you can be creative to find the land that's going to meet your needs. You know, we're really in a situation, and this is a situation that has grown in Idaho with COVID, that what you have access to is not really only about what you desire, but about what you can afford. And what I've noticed with farmland prices since COVID hit in Idaho, as it was one of the places that had less impact from the pandemic compared to a lot of places. We still have really low numbers of transmission. And that has had a dramatic impact on our land availability and the price of land in Idaho. And I don't know if that's going to be something that we see continue or if it's a blip in the market, but we had land prices increasing, and COVID really did make this another world. And so that is a situation that we're in and something to consider. And we really are excited to be with you today because this really is an important journey, and acquiring land is one of the most important journeys that you'll take as a farmer or rancher. So when we talk about land tenure, we're talking about the way people hold land, which is usually owning or leasing land. Other people do acquire land in other ways, but in our country, it's usually owning or leasing. And there's a number of legal, political, and business considerations with however you do hold land. And when we're talking about landowners, their responsibilities and rights are really defined by land use laws. So the law governs what you can do with your land. For tenants, those rights and responsibilities that you have are spelled out in your lease agreement. And ultimately, what you can do is going to chain down to those laws. But there might be a whole different set of rules around what you can do with that land because of that lease agreement. And then you're beholden to the lease agreement. The landowner is beholden to make sure that you're operating in accordance with land use laws. So there's kind of a hierarchy of responsibility and rights in that situation. So I would like to hear from you about, what do you consider to be secure land tenure? What would it take, the conditions that you would need to have to feel secure in your tenure of land? So anyone can speak, or you can type in the chat.
I guess I would say ownership would be ideal, but if I'd be also really comfortable leasing land, but then I feel like I'd want a really good relationship with the landowner and not like a family member that's been passed on to that's out of town or doesn't live in the area, that you don't know what decision they might be making. So I'd want some security for up to 10 years or something for doing improvements on the land.
And that's the rub with me too, is the infrastructure and the long-term security of putting all that sweat equity and infrastructure laid out is I've felt really driven toward ownership for a long time, and leasing may just need to be, I need to feel better about how to secure a lease that I feel, or how to find a lease where I feel secure and feel like I'm protecting my own investments as well and my own assets.
For us, you know, we've been leasing now for 5 years, and there's a lot of improvements we want to make we've backgrounded cabs over the winters the last 3 years, but the grills are falling down. And, you know, we're free to make improvements, but the investment that it would take to at the end not own anything is just doesn't make sense at all. So for us, with what we're doing with that particular aspect, it's got to be ownership.
For me, it would have to be ownership as well. And one of the things as I do a search, you know, and I would love, you know, any input on a good resource for this, but, you know, I look at some of the lands that are on reservations, and that's something that today I don't feel secure, because I don't know how laws could change in the future, water rights and things like that. So, but ownership is one piece of that.
Any other comments? And I just respond, Greg, that I think that there might be some differences with tribes and the way land is held with tribes. In North Idaho, the land that people purchase on Native American Indian reservations that's under their jurisdiction is very solid for them as land owners. There might be some additional or different rules and regulations that would impact what you could do with that land or how that land would be managed. And that could be something that you would find that would be a benefit for you, and you might find that it would be a detriment. So if you are buying agricultural land that is within the boundaries of a Native American reservation, it is really important to understand what that means in terms of where jurisdiction lies. Because there are certain things that in Idaho, the state does not have jurisdiction on tribal lands, but there is federal jurisdiction on tribal lands. So it's worth asking those questions and kind of digging in if you're looking at that. I wouldn't say that I see any detriments to buying on tribal land, at least I know of in North Idaho. And I work with quite a few Native Americans from those tribes in both the tribal government and in the community. And I feel really confident about those communities and people. And so I do think that it's a great option, and you would definitely want to look at some of if the rules might be a little bit different and what they're looking for. And also in leasing, because sometimes tribes are leasing land. And I know our tribes in the north are really looking a lot at sustainable land management and regenerative agriculture on tribal land.
Thank you.
So, you know, we talked about a few of these things. People mentioned affordability and definitely availability, and that stability of how long you can have access to your land. And sometimes we think that land ownership is really stable, and land ownership can be stable if we can afford that land. And so it's really important, as you know, we're considering ownership, that we make sure that we can afford what we're buying and the improvements that we're going to need to be able to work that land in the way that we want to. We just talked a little bit about compatibility with land use laws, compatibility with lease terms, or actually the deed, your purchase deed might have some stipulations about what you can do with that land. And then equity and access to capital. This came up as well, and where you can build equity and where you can put your funds as you build your farm. And as you develop a plan and are thinking about your land and your skill base, it could be that where Tyler and Leah are of having a lot of skill, understanding what they need in their land, you know, being really committed, a lot of experience in raising cattle, knowing this is my life path, and feeling really confident about moving forward and investing in land. And if you're newer to farming and you don't have that experience, then perhaps you're going to want to lease some land, try it out, figure out the type of agricultural production that you really want, and then the land base that you're going to need for that kind of production. And I do know a lot of producers that have dramatically changed their operations, starting with livestock and ending up having market gardens, or on the other side, starting as market gardeners and deciding to have livestock, or starting with more diversified vegetable production and then deciding that they really wanted to go into berry production, and that met their lifestyle better. So where people start is not always where they end up. And thinking about land tenure and the suitability of land and how you want to dial into how you want to use the capital that you have as you build that experience is important. And then it was also brought up the idea of housing and the infrastructure to support both your personal goals and your business goals. And then that does come into financial, because like David, you mentioned that you didn't, you know, want to be commuting to the land that you're working, and that makes total sense. And if you have a business plan, your time and the costs of commuting are something to be thinking about in that bigger financial picture. So as I said, land tenure is not fixed, and it may change over time, and what security looks like for you at certain times during building this career as a farmer or rancher, things could look quite different. And again, you know, finding land that is affordable and actually suits your needs is really important. And I think Diane's going to tell probably a lot of stories about people that she's worked with that have had land. And it's wonderful that you're not starting from the point of having bought a piece of land and then saying, what can I do with that land? Knowing what you want to do with the land is really important for that purchase. So like I said, there's basically 3 paths to land access. One is leasing land. We also often say renting land, and then there's buying land and accepting gifts and inheriting land. So before we jump into the pros and cons of those different ways to hold land, why do you think it's so hard to find land? Just throw out, what do you think some of the reasons are that it's so hard to find land to farm? Because we know it's hard.
I know here, it just seems like my family's dream and goal is throw a stone and you're going to hit someone else with the same dream and goal. So it's a limited commodity where a lot of people have similar dreams.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of people out there looking for land. About some of the other reasons that might be hard to find farmland.
At the moment, I think a lot of people are trying to get out of cities, and because their value in the city is so much greater, they can afford to just buy land at a large price. And because it's a demand, there are a lot of farmers that are willing to sell it at that price. So that kind of undercuts a lot of people who've been wanting to buy land.
I agree. Yeah, we're definitely seeing that in, you know, Teton County, you know, the Magic Valley, the Sun Valley area. You know, there's many areas of Idaho that people are moving to for quality of life reasons, and that does make it challenging. Anybody else want to share other reasons that they?
I think some people aren't selling because they're using short-term leasing like Airbnb. That's a big problem around here. People are hanging on to the land that they're not using for any other purpose, but they throw up a tiny house on it and rent and lease it out on Airbnb and just hang on to it, and the land's just sitting there. And that's what's paying their mortgage. They're not paying their mortgage, that's paying their mortgage.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all of those things that you've talked about. And part of the reason that Acce is such a challenge, and we know it's a challenge when we look at census, the number of beginning and farmers ranchers are dropping. And as I said, a lot of surveys and evaluation have said that access to land and access to affordable land is the biggest challenge. And it's really hard because it takes such a big capital investment to buy land. And sometimes it's hard to find the smaller parcels of land where you can start an operation and you have an opportunity to grow. But another thing is that financial readiness and the skills to negotiate a lease agreement or to negotiate a sale agreement are something that we all just don't naturally have. And so really understanding what it is to negotiate a good lease, or what lenders are really requiring if you're going to go and ask, be asking for a loan, is really important to know up front and to plan for. And as we talked about, people are competing with developers. We have a whole sector that is happening in investment portfolios where farmland and other land is being bought by large investment firms, so groups, and they see that as a long-term investment where they intend to lease that land, but land has a lot of value, and in many places it's appreciating really fast, so people are seeing it as a financial investment. And then we have a lot of established farmers and their family members, and this was also brought up, that land transitions are challenging, especially when they're transitioning to multiple people within a family. And then there's a lot of people's goals and aspirations for that land and attachment to that land that have to be navigated to make that land available for sale or lease. And then we are seeing a lot of non-farming rural living land seekers that, as Janelle said, are coming from areas where they are selling a piece of land or a home, and they have more capital because we in Idaho have generally had less expensive land. I do think that that is changing. And good farmland is expensive, that has attributes of really good soil and water and location, proximity to markets. Those are all values that end up being in that whole packet of farmland. But there's some other things that we see happening, and we do see that farmers are aging. And so, over 33% of producers nationwide are over 65. And then we see that, our younger producers under 35 are only operating on a really small portion of land. And I have looked at the numbers, and if you're interested, I could share them next week, about what's the change in the size of farmland between 2012 and 2017 in Idaho. And what we're seeing is an incredible increase in small farms. So farms that are, under 100 acres, we're seeing an increase in those farms, and we're seeing a decrease in the size of other farms. And that really could be because, as land use has changed and rules have changed, and people have been able to carve out of farmland parcels, pieces of land, either at a 40-acre level, or if you have a piece that's less than 40, land use laws have changed for agricultural land. And that has allowed smaller pieces of land to come onto the market. And again, it is an affordability. We also see that there's a difference between what senior farmers, or farmers that have grown up into farming and are older, what they're growing, and what younger farmers are producing. And lots of time what younger farmers are producing can be produced on less land. And that's really looking at that producing for a direct market or an intermediated market. So that's also playing into these changes in farmland availability. And just to kind of go back a little bit, when I came to Moscow in the early 90s, there were different laws about farmland and whether or not you could divide farmland than there are now. And so you used to not be able to divide parcels, and now you can divide them. And so what we've seen across the landscape are a lot of 40-acre parcels, or a little bit less than 40, because maybe somebody had, 87 acres and they could carve off 7 and then 2 40s. And so we've seen that create a change in the landscape, and also I think a rise in non-farming rural landowners, because there's been these more affordable pieces of land that could be bought. And so, that's a double-edged sword in some ways. But it's really interesting that of all the farmland that our surveys show are planning to be transferred in the next 5 years, which is only about 10% of the farmland that we have, there's only 2% that's projected to be sold on the open market. And that's not very much farmland that's really out there for us to buy. And the purpose of this is not to discourage you about finding farmland. It's just to explain some of the things that are going on behind the scenes about why it's so hard to find land to farm, and really acknowledging that that is a challenge. Another thing is that there's a lot of people that are involved in land access. So one, definitely land seekers as yourselves and landowners. But who else do you see is kind of involved in this picture of land access?
I mean, around here, you're getting a lot like the nature conservation, for like wildlife corridors, or, just to kind of save it from development, but it's always going to be open space, but it won't be farmable, developable open space.
Utility companies.
Oh, could you say a little bit more about that? Like,
Me? About utility companies? There's actually a piece of land that I'm in conversation with some people in Spokane about, and they own 1.5 acres, and just adjacent to them, there's another parcel that used to be part of their family farm in the, up to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and that's currently owned by the utility company, and they dump wood chips on it.
okay.
And there's also just right-of-way like literal access issues that are related to utility companies as well, was the other side of that I was thinking. So I know utility companies own parcels of land. They somehow acquire them through the city for who knows what sort of uses. And then there's just the right-of-way sort of things too.
That reminds me, my son is actually looking for land to farm, and so I'm helping him with that process. And we were looking at, there was a piece of land that was up in Boundary County, which is somewhere northern county in Idaho, that we wanted to look at. And so I contacted the real estate agent about it. And it actually, the only access to that land was going across a piece of land owned by the railroad. And what they told me is that was going to have to, that access, that easement was going to have to be renegotiated in like the next 5 years, and that it was going to be very expensive. The minimum it was going to be on an annual basis was $5,000. And I said, well, this is for farming, so that's not going to work for us. I mean, there's just no way that you could do that. But there are just kind of strange things around the peripheral property and what's happening on that, and how that could affect what you could do on the land that you're looking at buying.
Yeah, I looked at a piece here in North Carolina that was backed up to a huge reserve. Like, it was just this huge green space that was owned by the Walmart behind it. They owned like almost 200 acres, I think it was, that wasn't even where the store sat. And this cul-de-sac where there was like, anywhere from 1.5 to 7 acre parcels. And, semi-rural areas in North Carolina. It was wild. I didn't know what to think about it.
So definitely, you know, we think about land seekers and landowners, but we have community members that are involved in things like conservation and making decisions around those, or what the land use laws are, what the zoning is for different areas. Definitely local governments, and looking at land use, zoning, taxes, access to water. How is water permitted, or are there water rights? What are the rules around that? And so that also becomes a state level issue. Policy makers that are making those rules. And, you know, really real estate markets and agents are key to land access now, especially because we live in a world where things are so digital and people can be looking at land from so far away. And what I found is that in my work, I have real estates that contact me because they want to list something for a small farm, and I have to, you know, kind of work with them to help them understand what it is that a small farm can afford in terms of land. And I think there are real estate agents out there that are really committed and really believe in small farming. But as a land seeker, you might have to really do some work on educating people that are involved in land access about what it is that a small farm can support. Because I think people really do believe in small farming, but if they're not coming with farming experience, they have no idea what you can make on a small farm and what a reasonable price would be for selling land or for leasing land. They just don't have a frame of context. And so the more information that you can be prepared to impart to somebody, that's going to help you be able to have that conversation about what it is that you could afford. And, you know, people really care a lot about land often, and they might really want to see land stay in agriculture. And that can sometimes mean that they're willing to be more flexible on price to meet some of those other goals. And then another group is the bankers and the loan officers. And what is it that they're going to require from you to give you a loan to buy land? And we're going to talk about that more. So summing up some of the challenges, like we talked about, finding suitable and available and affordable land to purchase or lease, securing the loans to buy land. And that's where your record keeping, your financial record keeping is incredibly important. And if you are already farming, that you make sure that you have the records that you need to establish that farming experience and the financial aspect of that. Looking at what it means to negotiate a good lease agreement, and then what is in your lease agreement. Having the skills to read a lease and understand the different components, and knowing who can be on your land access team. And I say that because you as an individual really do need a team to support you in land access. And that might end up being a loan officer. It might mean that you are working with a land appraising firm. It could mean that you have a real estate agent that you develop a really good relationship with. You're probably going to need all of those people, and depending upon the goals that you have and the type of relationship you have with a landowner, you might need a lawyer, and you might need some financial advice from a financial advisor. So think about who's on your team, who's on your land access team, or who do you want on your land access team or need on your land access team to really help you develop the most secure land tenure situation that you can have. We already talked about competition for land. And I think, you know, one of the things that we do see is that, you know, the smaller the parcel size, the larger the cost per acre often. And so if there is a way that you can buy a larger parcel, you do have a less cost per acre. And there might be other enterprises that you're going to need to think about, you know, on that land. And it could be like what Janelle mentioned of running an Airbnb as another business. you might need to be looking at multiple income streams to support that land. And what I've often found is that sometimes people think that, yes, as a small farmer or a new farmer, I have an off-farm job, or somebody in the family has an off-farm job. And many times that is the reality, that for a long time, one or both people that are working the farmland and buying land, they have to have off-farm jobs to be able to make that work. And I think that that really goes into your personal goals and your business goals. But sometimes it's just really going to take that if you want to have land in a certain area and be able to afford it. Some of the things that really affect the land value and the rental rates, location, number one. If you are in an area that has a strong tourist economy, you're probably going to be looking at higher costs of land. Location and access to markets also. And what we've seen when we've looked at land use and where small farms are currently sited is that we see, generally speaking, not 100%, but generally speaking, that that the closer you are to your market, so let's say your market is a small town or an urban center, most likely the farms that are closest to that are producing vegetable production. So something that is more perishable, but they're bringing it into that close market. And then as you move out, you see more tree fruit production, more livestock, poultry production that's farther away from that center. And if you think about that, that kind of makes sense because of some of the costs of market access and when you need to access the market or the infrastructure for what you're producing. So if you're taking animals to slaughter once a year and you're looking at marketing that online, your need to access the community right next to you is really different than if you're doing a vegetable production system where you're going to farmers market or you're having CSAs. So we also see that those land values change. So sometimes people are raising higher value crops closer to their market because they have to get the return on investment in land. So it's just some interesting trends to think about as you're thinking about where to find land. There's definitely competition, but then we also look at soil, and in Idaho, this is a big one, and it's water. Mackenzie and I right now are involved in a project that is really looking at the possibility of scaling up fruit and vegetable production in Whitman County, Washington, and Latah County, Idaho, so the Moscow-Pullman area. And we've been really delving into this question of water and water rights. So over on the Washington side, Washington State is not going to be giving out any more water rights. In Idaho, the adjudication of water rights for our area up in this greater Latah County area is happening right now and in other parts of the state. So, first in right, first in time. And when you're buying land, you really need to understand the water rights or the water permitting access. And so in Latah County, they're doing that adjudication process right now to establish water rights for landowners. And then you can get a permit. You can go through a permitting process and you can get a permit to use more water than you can use on a daily basis. So it's interesting that there's a certain amount of water that's available to you in a certain jurisdiction based on rules that are there. And it's going to be really different depending on where you are. If you're in Whitman County, Washington, you have unlimited water for livestock, but you have a limit of 5,000 gallons of water a day for fruit or vegetable production, for crop production. And when you jump over to Latah County, you have 13,000 without getting a permit, without a water right. You can use 13,000 gallons of water a day for crop production, but you do not have unlimited water for livestock. And so just really considering what your water needs are, and then one of the key things that you need to find out is, can you access water? And what we do know about the part of North Idaho that we're in with like Latah County is that you know, if you ask for a water permit and it's really for producing food, we've had people ask in some ways that didn't really feel legit that it was for producing food, but more for clay mining, and they didn't get their water permit. But people that are producing food will get their water permit, but that is not necessarily stable. And that's just really important to know if you are thinking that you want to develop a farming operation that you want to pass on. If you don't have the water rights, that affects the stability of your access to water. And so if you have a permit and you do have water, that water, at some point in time, you could lose that because you don't have a right. And it's just really important to understand those things about water. Or if you're in an irrigation system, there's a number of places in Idaho where water is becoming more and more limited. And there are people that get their water turned off at the beginning of August. So these are things that you have to know because they affect your stability. They also affect the price of the land. So just delving into water, I can't say enough about how important that is. Whether or not there's existing improvements on the land or you need to make existing improvements. So understanding that history of the land is really important. And that goes into the current property condition. If you're transitioning out of one type of agricultural production into another, really understanding what the costs of that transition are going to be, especially in terms of what you're going to need to do around soil and whether something's been pastured or farmed in a certain way, if it meets your needs as a producer. And then what some of the landowners' needs or wishes are and the taxes. And one of the things that we do see in agriculture is that, you know, farmers really have invested in their land. And when they sell their land, that's their retirement. They may not have another retirement. And so it's one of the reasons that land can be so expensive, because that's what they need to fund themselves into the future. And so that is a challenge that is right up against oftentimes their wish to see that land in agriculture. And so some people have made some really interesting arrangements in selling land, for instance, that the landowner stays on the land until a certain part of their life. Let's say they're in their 70s and they retain the right to live on that property until they die or until they reach a certain age with that transition, because again, there's that need to have that stability of home. And if they know that they can stay on the land, that might mean that the land price can be less because they're not having to pay for a residence off of the land. So those are all things to think about. And then, you know, what are the taxes? That's going to be another thing that's pretty variable depending on location. So before we jump into some of the factors that affect readiness, any thoughts or reflections? Questions? Okay, great. So we're going to.
Greg might have wanted to share.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see everyone in my when I'm presenting. So Greg.
Is that true? I'm just trying to watch for people that are unmuting.
No, I unmute. It's a lot to consider, a lot to think about, and you know, it's funny. It's sort of a balancing act between, you know, your desire to get going, to start running, you know, the fear that, you know, all the good stuff's going to be gone, and then the patience to plan it and do it well from the beginning. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
I think you're right. For sure. And Zach had some questions about which option's better between leasing and buying that he put to me in the chat. And we're going to get into some pros and cons of leasing and buying land before the end of our time together tonight. Okay, so some of the things that affect your readiness or anyone's readiness to pursue land. One is being really clear on personal goals and business goals and where those things jive and where they don't. And then understanding your current financial position and the resources that you have available to you. And that could be not just resources to buy land, but also resources for cash flow. Or, you know, are you going to need an operating loan? Are you going to need to invest in some kind of equipment? You know, what are the skills that you need to build around managing finances or putting together financial statements? So that's kind of a pretty broad approach. And then your future earning potential, because that is what is really going to make a difference in being able to secure a really good lease and to buy land, is understanding how much you can pay over time. And we're going to help you be able to figure that out if you don't already know. So I'm going to jump into talking about the pros and cons of leasing, buying land and inheriting land, just from a pretty high level and talking about that. So leases can be oral or written. And unfortunately, I've heard a lot of horror stories about oral leases. You know, I think everybody goes into a relationship with the best intentions, and having an oral lease can leave a lot of things undiscussed. One of the things that I think is great about a written lease is it can take some of the personal, stress of maybe negotiating things out, because you have a form and you're just talking through everything on the form. It's not personal, it's just figuring out how are we going to work all of these different things. So it's important to know that oral agreements are legal agreements. It'd be really probably expensive to challenge that in court, but that's a binding agreement, is an oral agreement. So if you do have an oral agreement, it's something that you're really going to want to make sure that you write down, that you orally go over, that you both understand that agreement, and then you put that away somewhere so that you can refer to it, because you know that that thing that, you know, what you remember one day, you know, 6 months later when you're, you know, knee deep in crops, it's going to be hard to recall all of the specifics of what you agreed upon orally. Many ag leases are short term. And so they might be 1 year, 5 years, or even considering, some people consider a 10-year lease kind of a long term. But oftentimes people are trying out that relationship, and leasing land is a relationship. And so oftentimes it starts out with 1 year. And if that's successful, then people are on both sides are feeling more confident to go into a longer lease. And there's many different arrangements that can be done for leases. Some are just a straight cash lease. This is how much per acre. Others might be share agreements for a certain portion of the crop, for the sale of the crop or the profit off the crop. Others could be a mix of services in terms of land maintenance that have a value, as well as a cash lease or some other type of work trade that gets negotiated in that lease agreement. And then there's ground leases, and ground leases tend to be very long-term. And I'm just wanting to mention these. I mean, people might have heard of them. Perhaps you've heard about them when people build a cabin on Forest Service land and they have a 99-year lease. And so in these ground lease situations, it's a very long-term lease of land. And generally, when you have a ground lease, the person who's leasing that land assumes all of the expenses of that. So they're paying the taxes. You know, they pay for all of the infrastructure. If it has a well on it, they're going to be paying for the well, and they're going to be paying for any buildings they put on it. But at the end of that lease, everything that exists on that property becomes the property of the landowner. So, you know, and sometimes within a ground lease, there is an option that is written into the lease that the person who's leasing the land can actually sell those improvements to the next person. But if you've been leasing land for 40 years and then you decide to sell, that next person only has 10 years. And so that creates a risk, and it would be harder to sell that property or your improvements in that property. And so I just want to put that out there because sometimes you do hear the word ground lease, and just to say how that is different from one of these other short or long-term leases. And then there's leases with options to purchase. So those are some of the lease agreements that we see. Some of the things that are great about leasing is there's a lot of flexibility. You can learn a lot on a piece of land with low risk financially. I get that does depend on what you invest in that piece of land, but there's not a lot of risk. You can start small, you can learn a lot, you can build your market, you can build your brand. And that's what you own, those market relationships and that brand. So you have that opportunity, and you have an opportunity to build skills. And depending on who you're leasing from, you might also have the benefit of a really nice mentoring relationship. Oftentimes, the people that own the land retain a lot of the responsibilities for financial aspects of the land. Again, this is negotiated in the lease, but they might be maintaining the well, they might be maintaining the fences, they're paying the taxes. Those are things that you don't have to worry about oftentimes in a lease. Sometimes you can get low rent, or as I mentioned, exchange of goods, whether that's a share of the harvest, whether that is taking care of pasture or renovating pasture. I have a friend that owned land just outside of Moscow, and their neighbor who raised cattle was running on their pastures, and they needed to improve their pasture. So in lieu of rent, that rancher actually went through, because he had the equipment, and tilled and replanted the pasture, and actually worked on their behalf with an NRCS equip cost share for renovating the pasture, which, you know, if you do own land, you do have access to things like NRCS. But in this situation, he was able to exchange his work of renovating the pasture for that lease payment. And so again, that's a service exchange. If you're leasing and you're just starting, that means that you may have more capital to invest in your equipment, your livestock, to develop those assets that then you can move to your own property. So you can grow more slowly without some of the pressures, financial pressures of owning land, and it gives you this great opportunity to practice and perhaps change what you want to do. So definitely, if you don't have farming experience, I would, wholeheartedly recommend starting off with leasing some land or interning, and making sure that that's really what you want to do before you decide to make that investment. Some of the things that are challenging about leases is that there is less security. That landowner, something can change with that landowner, whether they decide that they don't want to lease again, or they might pass away, and then you're dealing with the estate of that landowner. And that's a relationship that you really need to maintain. And so that can be challenging sometimes, and sometimes it can work beautifully. You are investing in that piece of land, you're investing in the soil, managing weeds, building whatever infrastructure, and that has so much value. You can think about negotiating that in your lease, the value of doing those improvements. But once you really build that soil and you move to a new property, you have to probably rebuild that soil. So those types of investments are things that you don't get to take with you. And if something goes south in your lease or short-term access, you might have to walk away at a time that's really inconvenient. And one of the farmers that we work with talked about, they had an oral agreement to some land, and some things went south, and they had to go out with their headlamps at night and harvest everything off their land with a couple hours notice. So that's not great. Landowners can sometimes limit what you can do with that property based on what their priorities are for the land. And we already talked about traveling to and from. Non-farming landowners, they might have high rent prices and they might not, because land management can mean a lot to a non-farming landowner, because they might be hiring somebody to mow their pastures. They might be hiring somebody to come in and help with their horses. They might really not have the understanding of noxious weed management. There might be so many things that you could do for them that would alleviate some of those high prices. And both you and the landlord need to have sufficient liability insurance. And this is something that you really need to talk about on where does liability, who holds what liability, and then how do you make sure that you are both sufficiently covered? Any questions or comments about leasing?
Yeah. So I do have a comment here. An issue that we have right now with my grandfather's place that we're leasing currently is, and it kind of comes back to our schooling at Utah State is something called the renter's dilemma. You know, who is responsible for what things there in that lease? And so, for example, on our place, we have corrals and facilities that way for livestock, but they're 40 years old. You know, as a whole, they're 40 years old. There has been some maintenance done, but it just is to the point where it needs a complete overhaul. But my grandfather is 92, and at that stage in his life, he doesn't see the need to spend a lot of money into materials to reinvest into those facilities. But where I'm renting, it would benefit me to do those facilities. But as far as investing my money into his ground and his facilities, because he is the landowner, that kind of creates some issues there, you know, with our operating loan with our lender and things like that. And so there are some things like that we face, and why we're so interested in finding our own place.
Right, exactly. And those things might get more complex when that land transfers to heirs, because then you have more people that you're negotiating with.
Yeah, definitely.
We have similar going on with where we've been leasing because of all the flooding, and the landlord is currently living across the state and has barely been by, and he knows the culvert is completely washed out, and he knows that the only person who is going to fix that is going to be him. We can't replace the culvert. You know, there's no way that we would be able to replace that culvert. And that's the ability to access, that's some of the most farmable land on that 64 acres is on the other side of that culvert. So, and it's a handshake deal, so.
Yeah, I just keep thinking, you know, when you talk about how leases can be oral or written, really the more things that you can get spelled out in writing to clarify a lot of those situations, and then sitting down and having conversations is very helpful. And you know, we've done that, but it's just what they're willing to do and what we're willing to do. It's just, it doesn't quite line up perfectly, and that's okay. You know, it just means there's going to be a shift.
Okay, for sure. You know, I think one of the great things that you have, Leah and Tyler, is that you have the financial history and credit of running your operation to be able to put that together in your financial documents, to be able to secure a farm loan through like farm service agencies. So a beginning farmer rancher loan without having to have 35% down for the purchase of that land. And I know other farmers that they've been in lease agreements and specifically starting out knowing I'm going to get my 3 years of production financial information that I need to have, and that those records, so that when I can actually go in and purchase land using a farm service agency beginning farmer loan program. And so sometimes, you know, you are picking a situation that is not your optimal situation because you have a plan to move to your optimal situation.
And that's actually exactly what I'm doing, Colette, is combine. I could possibly qualify for the FSA considering my background in education and 2 years. I filed a Schedule F for 2 years, So the combination, I could probably do it, but I want a little bit more time to make that look really, really good to get what I actually want. And so that's why I'm considering a lease as a bridge to owning right now.
And especially if you're changing locations from one part of the country to another part of the country.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I'm tired. Yeah. The wet and the flooding, you know, I know and I know what I'm getting into going back to dry Eastern Washington, North Idaho. And I'll tell you what, considering the drying facilities I would have to have here for what I need, you know, what I'm trying to put together, the trade-off is huge.
Okay. And so for you, one of the things you'll be also looking at are, you know, what are the health department rules for what it is you want to do in terms of your value added product.
And there's no cottage laws here in North Carolina. So there's much higher costs in having to rent a commissary. Whereas in Washington state, if it's still the same in Washington, there are cottage laws in Washington. I haven't looked at Idaho yet on that, but yeah.
There are cottage laws in Washington, and the bar is much higher than in Washington than it is in Idaho. And that's
Right.
thing to consider is like what state is going to be amenable to
Right.
Right. And it's my understanding that Wyoming is has passed some rules that I don't understand all the ins and outs of around livestock and livestock processing that is beneficial for people that are wanting to go into direct and intermediated marketing of livestock. So, and how close you are to those facilities definitely makes a difference. We do see that there's different types of landlords, you know, on the private side. Sometimes it's other farmers and ranchers. We talked about people that are not operating farms or ranches, or it's family members of retired farmers and their heirs. Sometimes schools or churches do have land that they own, that they are interested in making available in a lease situation, which could be a great way to start, especially if you can build a relationship, a market relationship, you know, with those institutions. We'll talk a little bit more later about conservation organizations and land trusts, and then the different types of government organizations that might also lease land. So federal, state, local, and Native American tribes, which we talked about. So when we talk about land ownership, you know, there's the dream of the gift, though the gift is not free either, but, you know, land can be gifted and you can inherit it. And then there's, you know, a fee title purchase, or a combination where you have a fee title purchase and then you are selling or donating a conservation or agricultural easement on that land, which you know, is a more complex relationship, but it is what some people are able to do, to work with a land trust or a conservation organization with the idea that they are going to buy a piece of land and they're willing to put an easement on it. And so that other organization essentially buys that easement. And so let's say, you know, you have a $400,000 piece of land, and you know, you're willing to put an easement on that, and you make an agreement with a conservation organization that they're going to raise $100,000 to buy that easement, and you're working these types of relationships. So it's a long-term relationship. It does put some provisions on what can be done with that land in perpetuity and the value of it if you decide to resell it. But sometimes those relationships make it possible for people to buy land. And then, you know, there can be buying land over time. And again, some shared equity arrangements with a non-farming partner in buying land as well. So a little bit more about conservation easements, and, you know, they are a restriction on a landowner voluntarily places on part or all of their land, and that transfers with land ownership. And so those are held by organizations. So it's essentially like the rights to do certain things are held by another organization or by governments. And most often what I've seen in Idaho is that conservation easements have really been looking at non-working lands. And I know somebody mentioned that, perhaps it was Arden that mentioned that earlier on in the Jackson Hole Teton area. There is a lot of conservation. We do see kind of a shift that's happening in that world of land trust to start to see agriculture, as agriculture can be a partner in conservation, and that there are ecosystem benefits depending on what the agricultural system looks like and how land is managed. And so we are seeing that there are agricultural conservation easements that are coming into being, and it really depends on that particular entity. So like the Wood River Land Trust has done some innovative things over in the Sun Valley area. And I think the people that are leading that land trust are really understand the value of agricultural land. University of Idaho actually has a partnership with the land trust and the Nature Conservancy to really do some research about how agricultural land can provide those ecosystem benefits, which I think will be helpful to this in the longer term. But, you know, talking to your local land trust could be a way to find land. I do know somebody in Moscow that she actually found her land through that conversation. The land trust had a piece of land, that ag land, it had an ag conservation easement, and that didn't work for what she wanted to do. But the family that had actually put that easement on the ag land, they had an adjacent piece of land which had been carved off, which was the family's home. And it ended up that she was able to buy that through the relationship. So leave no rock unturned. If you have organizations that are doing this in your area, definitely talk to them. I did a land access training about 1.5 years ago, and about 7 people from a land trust, Blue Mountain Land Trust in Northeast Oregon, came to that training because they were really interested in how to make these partnerships work. So some of the things we've talked about, some of them already, the pros of owning farmland is that you have rights to do with your land with whatever that local and state, federal jurisdiction says you can do. You have permanent access if you have the correct easements. So there are definitely fewer limitations. You might start with a blank slate and be able to create what you want, design your farm in a way that is super efficient in meeting your needs. And that's one of the things that I think we don't talk about enough, is that when you design your farm, in the end, you know, 50 steps of efficiency day after day, multiple times a day, can make a lot of difference in really your time management. And it has a financial basis and quality of life basis to think about it. So when you do purchase land and you can do a really good design on that land, or do some modifications, that can really help you run a successful farm business. You're building equity, financial equity in terms of your soil and your infrastructure. If you do, you know, you're making improvements that if you decide to sell that land, and land does appreciate by itself. So that's a really good investment. If your part of your goal is to live on site, that's a plus. Plus there are some tax benefits and some other programs that could serve you as a landowner, and things like the NRCS Natural Resource Conservation Service EQIP program, where you might qualify for cost share for some of the infrastructure you need, and you need to be a landowner to qualify for these programs. And you have more financing opportunities. It is a substantial investment, and you do need to do the preparation financially to make sure that you have all the paperwork that you need, and be able to keep that up to date so that you can bring that to your lender. You might end up being in a situation where you're a bit cash poor because your equity is tied up in the land and you have a high mortgage payment. So then you might really have to look at an operating loan, or, you know, some type of secondary loan or income source to be able to run your farming operation. You might also inherit land that has challenges that you didn't realize it has, whether that is soil compaction from large machinery on it, or updating the infrastructure, or one of the challenges that we see here on the Palouse is that you can dig a well and not get very much water, even though your neighbor has a fantastic well. You know, that's a gamble. And if you're buying land that doesn't already have some of this infrastructure to it, power, water, you know, a sewer system or a septic dug, those are things that you have to invest right away. And so having enough money to do that is a challenge. And, you know, that's like right now, the challenge for my son when he looks at land is that, you know, the affordability of land, adding in the cost of that infrastructure, he's not there yet. And he's decided that he's going to keep looking, but he's probably going to need to save money for a couple more years to be able to afford a piece of land and actually have the cash to put into that infrastructure development. So accepting gifts and inheriting land, it's a great opportunity for some people. There are a lot of programs, succession planning programs within University of Idaho and Extension. So if you do have this option to be able to inherit land, I can definitely refer you to some people that are experts in working with families. And so there's many ways that this happens. It can be gradual, it can be all at once, it can be a lease purchase agreement. Again, it's as complex as we've already talked about as leasing and owning. And then it does have some of its own challenges that have to be planned for in terms of taxes, gift and estate taxes. So you definitely need a really good team to help you think through these types of inheriting and transferring land. We'll talk a little bit more next week about this concept that no land is truly free. And that's because we have to not only consider the cost of purchasing land or the cost of leasing land. And even if somebody says you can farm this land without any type of lease payment or you inherit it 100%, you have operating costs. And those have to be part of your financial picture and understanding where that operating income, what that cash flow looks like. And so there's always things that we have to financially plan for. So any thoughts or reflections at this point on the land tenure options?
It's daunting.
Yeah, and I agree. It is daunting, and I think, you know, the best thing that you all can do is be really clear about what it is you're interested in, and dial in on goals and developing a plan, and then being creative in that plan. And so that's really maybe thinking about the land tenure options you're interested in right now and what your ultimate goals might be and whether or not those have to be the same. And I know a number of you are already in that transitional journey of having leased land to move into buying land. But again, what are the options, you know, when you look at the vision you have for your life and your goals and your values, are there some land tenure situations that would work for you if you did own a smaller piece of land, but then we're in a leasing situation for other land that maybe you own a smaller piece of land where you have your home and you have the most of your infrastructure for your livestock operation, but then you're really leasing your pasture lands and you're recognizing that's not something that I can put in my financial picture. So just what are those things that will work with your personal and your business goals? And then, you know, we've talked a lot about finances and about availability. And I think that one of the things that is important to watch right now is kind of what is happening in land, whether or not COVID is artificially inflating land prices for a short amount of time. And you know, it's kind of hard to know about those things, but I would talk to bankers about it, and I would talk to, you know, appraisal companies, and, you know, when you know where you want to be, talk to them, ask them what they really think the trend is going to be, and financial investors. There's a lot of resource people that could be on that team that you would want to talk about, talk to, because, you know, sometimes I feel like humans are a reactionary species a lot of the time, and we're in a pandemic that probably maybe one or two, you know, very, very few people have lived through the previous pandemic. And so we're reacting to something. And when that settles out, it could be that people have decided, yes, this is really a trend to move to rural areas, or people could have like reacted and moved to rural areas and be like, this is not for me. I did a really fast decision and now I want to move out. So it could create opportunities as well as challenges at the same time. So just thinking about that this is kind of an unknown landscape right now in terms of land. So being able to watch for those opportunities. So I did ask everybody to go into the classroom and download the personal and business goal worksheets. No pressure, but did most people have an opportunity to at least download them and look at those worksheets?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Okay, great. Because, you know, this is really the place to start. And I think sometimes, you know, personal goals are, you know, kind of sometimes easiest to do. And then, you know, business goals, we start to look at those and our vision. And then we have to put some legs on those, and we're going to be talking about them. You know, those of us that are, you know, working in a family situation, or we have a farm partner, our personal goals may or may not be the same. And they're probably intersecting at some place, but there might be things that we want that are different from like what our kids want. And this is actually myself and my daughter on a trip to Yellowstone. And, you know, thinking about this work-life balance and how you're going to negotiate things. And if you do have kids, what does that look like if your child is passionate about dance and you live really rural? And this is a real situation. There's a farming couple that actually have a daughter who's about 20 now. She's the age of my son. And they lived pretty rural in Kuski. They had a really successful herb business, and her daughter became passionate about dance. And they really wanted her to be able to follow her life goal. And it ended up that, you know, the mom left the farm for a while to go live closer to town so the daughter could achieve her goals. And they had to do a lot of structuring because, you know, they didn't know when they had her, she was going to be an amazing dancer. And so these things come up, and it's really important to think about your personal goals and then to kind of project into the future. And what is it that you want to have in the future? And are you close to the things that are going to be important to you when you retire? Do you feel like you need to be in proximity to certain health care within a certain amount of driving area? How much income do you need, you know? And definitely, I know that people always think, you know, like about like, well, what do I want in terms of my life experience with my cropping system or my animal system? But really, what are the goals of the people that are living and working with you on the farm? And then with your business goals, thinking about the type of businesses you want, and then where are your business and personal goals compatible? One of my long-term colleagues that raises blueberries, one of the reasons that he chose to raise blueberries is he knew when his busiest times were going to be, and that was going to be in, you know, spring when he started pruning through the harvest season. He'd be able to wrap up early in the fall, and he would have several months that he could travel and fish. And that was super important to him to have that downtime. Other people, I know, you know, they don't want to be tied to the farm all summer. So they've chosen livestock where they live close enough that they can have a farm stay situation where somebody can take care of their farm so they can get off the farm during a time of year that they can go hiking and backpacking, and that's really important to them. So what are the things that are really important to you? And then how is that compatible in terms of your business and personal goals? And that's what that worksheet is about, is really looking at those things for you and your farm partner, your family. And those worksheets are most successful if you really do them separately and then come together and have a conversation around them. Because we all know that we're individuals and we look at things a little bit differently. Oh, and I do want to say also this, this piece about transitioning farm between generations, or what your goals are for transitioning your farm to the next generation. And I mentioned this when I was talking about water earlier on, but you know, really understanding what the trajectory is for where you decide to farm, and kind of what you think that community is going to look like in the long term, and is that going to be what you want to transfer into for your family. So I wanted to go around and ask people to just share a little bit about their initial reflections about their goals that they look like. You know, you might want to share a personal goal or business goal that you have, or if you found an area of alignment or conflict that you're thinking you need to look at deeper. Is there anybody who'd like to share, or did you get that far?
I guess I could share a conflict, which
Okay.
kind of, just because it speaks on what you were just saying, is just the lifestyle time and managing I have 2 young kids and I love spending time with them, and just the reality of trying to figure out a schedule where I can get enough time with my kids. And I also love the work I do, and I've always got 10 other projects I want to do. So just the reality of trying to figure out those resources. And I know inherently I always just have so many conflicts and time. It's a big one with farming. And never finding the downtime yet.
Anybody else want to share?
What I'm thinking about is, you know, I'm also building my business using holistic management as a tool. And so a lot of this, I love that this is where you're starting off too, because this is the foundation as well of holistic management. But something that in all of the training I've done in holistic management so far that I haven't heard or considered is, my kids are young. They're 4. I have 4-year-old twins, and I don't know what they're going to be like when they're 12, 15, 17. And like, I'm aware of it, but you framed it in a way that was that made me think about it differently.
Well, I can share one in terms of alignment. For my wife and I, like I said earlier, you know, this is for our next chapter. And so for us, one of the keys is, of course, eating and sharing healthy food, but also moving, staying busy. I am so tired of being behind a desk and working for someone else. And so the idea of getting up getting my hands dirty, being outdoors, that gets me excited. And so for me, it's total alignment. I mean, when I go down, you know, I did the whole worksheet last night and reviewed some of that with her, and we're in perfect alignment with everything. But that's probably because we don't know what we don't know yet, right? So there will be plenty of surprises, but you know, that's the personal goal as part of the business goal, and areas of you know, shared passion like that. I mean, we're on board. We're diving into this.
That's great. And Janelle, I love that you mentioned holistic management. I really love that frame of developing a really holistic goal that includes not just your personal and business goals, but also, you know, what do you want that resource base, your land to look like in the future? And that's part of the goal. And I think that that's really important. And there's a really great book that I have used in different courses that I've taught before that's called At Home with Holistic Management. It's by Ann Adams. And I find that it's one of the really approachable, like, you know, some holistic management books are like this thick, but, you know, this is much thinner. And it has a lot of worksheets in it and ways to really think about your goal, but then also to test your decisions against your goal. And that's one of the things that I really love about holistic management, is that it's constantly using and refining that goal that incorporates all of these different things that are important to you into kind of one clear statement that, you know, that's your eye on the prize. And then being able to look at, you know, and it's a great way to think about land as well, and assessing land against that goal. So I definitely recommend that book by Ann Adams. Again, it's At Home with Holistic Management.
Yeah, and the testing your decision making becoming second nature is a huge goal in holistic management too. And I'll tell you what, nobody bursts my bubble as much as my mentor in holistic management. She very, you know, gently and lovingly, but very firmly pokes holes in everything I suggest to her. And it's really good for my ego.
Well, and you know, that's another thing you brought up, mentors, and where you decide to have land, like what are those relationships that you can have with other farmers? And, you know, who are those mentors, or who are those resource people? You know, I think all of that is really important to consider, especially if you aren't already dialed into a specific place, but you have some flexibility of that. And maybe as part of why you know, decided that you wanted to be where you would be, because you already have that community. But if you are moving to a new place, you know, how can you become involved and build relationships in that agricultural community? And who's, you know, who is it that is going to be there, that is going to be willing to come out and help you troubleshoot on your farm, be part of your team again? And,
I want to share a comment from Tyler and Leah that they put in the chat. They think an important thing to think about is short-term versus long-term. And some of their personal financial goals have been sacrificed for the last 5.5 years over the short term that they have been there, but it has helped them to retain more earnings in their business and set them up to succeed with their personal goals long-term.
And then the decision is to figure out where you're at on that threshold of making a transition into something new. And I totally hear that all day long.
That's great. Okay.
My current goal is to grow where I am at the moment, which I have some space, I have some animals, I have some garden space, and to learn everything I can here while my investment is relatively low, and hopefully transition that into something larger, or maybe be able to be sufficient on what I have and go from there.
So I think, you know, as we're kind of wrapping up tonight, leaving you this question about how ready are you to engage in your preferred land tenure option. And part of this course is to help you become ready, but also to recognize, like, where are the gaps, you know, where are the weak links, as Janelle knows about weak links. You know, what is it that you need to put more energy into first as you are moving along this journey? And, you know, we've talked about this a little bit. Beyond a great vision, there is a plan. And, you know, in the end, if you don't have a plan, you really don't know what you can afford, and you can't really convey what you can afford to a prospective landowner that you want to lease or buy from. And so, developing these plans, while sometimes it feels like it's a lot of work and a lot of thought and reflection, they're going to be so useful as it really just helps you dial in what you want to do and then what you can afford. And there's so many people out there doing so many interesting things. And, you can really look at those things and learn from them and then be more creative in your plan. But I really see that plans are decision-making tools that take the form of a document, because they give you a process by which to think through what it is you want to do and to help you uncover some of those blind spots and also some of the opportunities that you might not have seen if you hadn't taken the time to really delve deep. And, again, they're really going back to the goals you have for your life and for your business. But then they go the next level and you start to say, well, why is it that I think I can achieve these? And, what is the plan for doing so? And this question, why you think you can achieve them, that's going to be a question that your lender's going to have. Why do you think you can make the payment on this farm? Why do you think that this enterprise is going to be successful? And when they see that you walk in and you have clear goals and you have your financial documents and you have a plan, that is going to be super exciting for them. See that you've thought through that. And again, the process of developing your plan and then revisiting those plans over time is where the value really lives. So financial readiness is really about understanding your specific financial situation and your ability to borrow money or your comfort with borrowing money. And there are a number of people that say, I don't want to borrow money. I want to figure out how I can get into a land situation without borrowing money. And so that can take a lot more time. Or it can take, going on a different route to get back to where you want to be. Because if that's one of your goals and that's really important to you, then your route might be a little bit more circuitous to get to land access. But it is also helpful to think about the funding that is out there to not only buy, but also to operate your farm, and to recognize that, I've worked with a lot of farmers who might have a lot of credit card debt, but they don't want to get an operating loan from a farm. But really, they have an operating loan from a credit card. And so really thinking about, where do we have debt in our life? Where do we have equity or credit? And what's the smart way to use debt? Because there are smart ways to use debt as long as you have that stable financial base to be able to use it. And so we're going to talk next week about how to really look at where you stand financially and think through those financial resources that you have access to. And then moving forward, it's really looking at what's your earning potential and how much income will your farm business have to support your life, your farm, and then are you going to need farm income? Do you already have it, and how much? And then, at what place does it become that the business is really paying off of those loans? And so you may decide that you look at your land kind of in maybe like a two-phase. You might say, I'm going to buy this piece of land and it has a house on it, and so this 10 acres, this is really my home. I would buy this anyway. It's a mortgage that I have to pay, but that's not really part of my farm business. My farm business is paying for this 30 acres over here. So how do you want to plan for that? And thinking about ultimately how you want to structure that farm business and where that ownership of land lies. And those are kind of bigger conversations that you get into in your business plan, whether your farm business really leases the land from you or owns the land. And so those are things that you can think more deeply about. So I'm going to quickly go over the homework for next week. And again, this is a skill building course. So It's great if you come and you listen and you're part of the conversations. You will get so much more out of this course if you do the homework and go through these, finding these documents, having them available, doing the activities. You're just going to really gain a lot out of it. And I know it's going to take a few more hours of your time, but I really encourage you to take the time to do it. So one document that you have in the classroom is this financial documents checklist. And it's going to just ask you to identify where are these documents that you would need to create these key financial statements that we're going to talk about next week. So can you find these? Do you have them? It provides a couple of free places to check your credit report. And then after you've done that, I'm going to ask you to go back and think more about those personal life goals and to really think about that document that you've been working with on those goals as something that you're going to just keep revisiting and making notes on throughout this short course. And then thinking a little bit more about the type of farm you want, who your customers are going to be, how you make money, and thinking about that geographic placement to market or how you're going to sell your products. What kind of processing and infrastructure do you need to be close by to make your operation be successful? The second piece of homework is there's a land tenure readiness self-assessment worksheet. And so again, this is for things for you to think about where you are in this land tenure journey. And it's really straightforward. I'm not going to ask you to share your whole statement, but next week I will be asking you to share some of the things that, you know, what came up for you? What was kind of your conclusions about where you are in terms of readiness? What are some of the things that you really need to look at on your land before you're going to be ready to buy farmland? And then I think one of the most fun aspects of this is asking you to delve into some of the case studies about land access that are in the classroom and to explore the case study section, read some of them. And then there's a document, a worksheet that can guide you through the case studies and help you look at them more deeply. And we'll talk about those a little bit more next week. So before we jump into question, if you have any questions right now, that's great. These slides, I will put a PDF of them in the classroom. I'm going to switch to look at the classroom right now. So I have to do a new share to get into the classroom. So here it is. So here's the classroom that I know you've all been in. So I want to thank Holly. Let me know that where is it? This introduction to land tenure resources, a couple of the links, things have changed on the web. The constant challenge of keeping a resource list up to date. So we're going to go through and double check those links, and the ones that are broken, we will find the links to them. There's only a couple in this worksheet, but here's where you're going to find all of the different worksheets and the checklist that I talked to you about. I think you might have looked through these a little bit more in depth. If you're interested in looking more about the pros and cons of different types of land tenure, you know, like what are the, you know, the best things about leasing, what are the pros, what are the cons, how does that compare to looking at owning land? In this section 3, there's going to be a lot more resources to help you think through that. And that's an important piece of looking at the case studies. So I'm going to move down, and to the bottom is where you're going to find the case studies. So these are written case studies that were provided by all those different educators I talked about that have worked with people that are seeking land. And so they don't necessarily have the same format because they've come from a lot of different sources. So definitely delve into the written ones. And then last time we offered the course, we had these 3 farmers tell their land tenure stories. And so these are the videos, the live recordings from the course. And so we encourage you throughout the time that we have together, and at least grab one of these and watch it before next week. And each one of these amazing producers has a different land tenure story and a different way that they found their land. And so we really hope that you'll take the time to at least watch one of these videos. They're all pretty good. They're all about 30 minutes long. So with that, any questions about any of those things? Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining tonight. And I really look forward to next week when we're going to delve into the different key financial statements, and then to have all of you meet Emily Black when she comes on to talk about how they found their farmland and what are some of the things that they're doing. They have an amazing story that I'm sure you're going to love to hear. And so I'm excited for that. So thanks for joining. Contact myself or Mackenzie at any time. I'm going to make sure Mackenzie's email is in the classroom, because she might not have been on any of the emails that I've sent out so far. So if you find out anything that is broken or you have questions about, contact me, and have a really great week. Look forward to seeing you next Thursday.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.